We'll now look at how to find trig functions for different acute angles. And we'll start by looking at three particular angles. The first one we'll do is 45 degrees, or in radians, pi over 4. So we're going to let this be theta. And if I have a right triangle where one angle is 45, the other angle must also be 45. It has to be an isosceles triangle. And this comes from the fact that adding up the angles of a triangle should give us 180. So if I make these side lengths 1, which all that matters is that they're the same, Pythagorean theorem gives me that the hypotenuse should be the square root of 2. We can now find sine of theta, which would be our opposite, over hypotenuse. And once we rationalize, we get the square root of 2 over 2. Cosine would be adjacent over hypotenuse, which is once again square root of 2 over 2. Tangent of theta is opposite over adjacent, which is just 1. Cosecant. Cosecant is going to be hypotenuse over opposite, which is the square root of 2. Secant is hypotenuse over adjacent, which is once again the square root of 2. And then finally, cotangent is adjacent over opposite, which is 1. So now if we have a 45 degree angle or a pi over 4 angle, we have all 6 possible trig functions and their exact value. The next angle we'll look at is 60 degrees or pi over 3. And if I have this triangle here, the marked angle here is 60 degrees. Well, if I want to build an equilateral triangle, equilateral triangles have 60 degree angles in all 3 angles. So all 3 of these sides are the same. So now when I consider just my original triangle, if I label this side 2, the hypotenuse 2, the side down along the bottom is going to be 1, since this whole thing up here is 2, and it's half of that. Pythagorean theorem gives us that the other side is the square root of 3. And now we can find these trig functions. Sine of 60 will be opposite over hypotenuse. Cosine is adjacent over hypotenuse. Tangent is opposite over adjacent, which is just the square root of 3. Cosecant will be hypotenuse over opposite, and once we rationalize, we get 2 square root of 3 over 3. Secant of theta will be my hypotenuse over my adjacent, which is 2. And then finally, cotangent of theta, which is, we messed that up, adjacent over opposite. And once we rationalize, we get the square root of 3 over 3. So now I have all 6 exact values for 60 degrees or pi over 3. The last exact value we'll do will be 30 degrees or pi over 6. And we have this indicated angle in this triangle to be 30 degrees. And using the fact that the angles of a triangle have to sum to be 180, tells me that the other angle here is actually 60 degrees. So we can use the same dimensions we had on our 60 degree triangle. Now if I have sine of 30 degrees, we have opposite over hypotenuse. For cosine, adjacent over hypotenuse. Tangent is opposite over adjacent, which once we rationalize, we get the square root of 3 over 3. Cosecant is hypotenuse over opposite, which is 2. Secant is hypotenuse over adjacent, and once we rationalize, we get 2 squared of 3 over 3. And then finally, cotangent, which is adjacent over opposite, which gives us the square root of 3. So now we have the exact values for 45 degrees, 60 degrees, and 30 degrees. If we want to consider that in radians, we have pi over 4, pi over 3, and pi over 6. For any other acute angle, we're going to have to consult our calculator. It's a lot harder to find the exact value. And your calculator should have 3 buttons that look something similar to this. They may say sine of theta or sine of x or something like that, but they should look like these. And so these can help us find 3 of our 6 trig functions. We can find sine, cosine, and tangent. For our other 3, we're going to have to use the fact that cosecant is 1 over sine, secant is 1 over cosine, and cotangent is 1 over tangent. So we can just do 1 divided by, and then use our sine, cosine, and tangent buttons. It is also very important to note that your calculator should have 2 modes, one for degrees and one for radians. So depending on the problem, you may want to double check that your calculator is in the right mode to account for the type of angle you are giving it. And the last thing to point out is your calculator should also have these buttons that say sine -1, cosine -1, and tangent to the -1. And it's important to recognize that these are in fact not cosecant, secant, and cotangent. These are something else, so don't use them whenever we know the angle and we're trying to find the trig function. These will come into handy a little bit later.